When I was 19, I was married with 2 kids. My oldest son, Jacob, was 2, and the younger boy, Tyler, was about 1. We all lived in an apartment in a tiny little town, and there were 4 apartments in our building. My mom lived in the front left-hand apartment, and we lived in the back upstairs one. We lived there peacefully, until this night. You see, in this tiny little town, there's a woman, Leslie, who suffers from many mental illnesses, including schizophrenia. She generally doesn't like people and prefers to be left to her own devices. She often wanders the streets at all hours and seemed to particularly hate my younger son. If we passed her on the street, she would stare at him and burst into a curse word-fueled rant. We would just ignore her and try our best to continue on our way. So, now that you know some backstory, let's get into what happened on this particular night. The boys had been in bed for a couple of hours, and my husband and I had just gotten to settling in. I feel like I had just closed my eyes when I heard a noise from the front of the apartment. It sounded kind of like a toy box had been dumped, so I assumed one of the boys had gotten up. I hopped out of bed to see what they were up to. If one knew I was up, the other would soon be up as well, and that would result in a very long night. When I walked out of my room, though, I was shocked to realize the front door was standing wide open, silhouetted by the porch light, and hunched at my boy's bedroom door was Leslie. She was muttering to herself, something about killing the little demon child. In one hand, she held a screwdriver, as she used both hands to jiggle the knob. Luckily, the boy's door stuck when it was humid out, so there was a trick to opening the door. I knew and understood that Leslie was just sick and not in her right mind, but I wasn't sure how to handle this whole situation. And clearly, I didn't want her to turn her aggravated attention to me, but I also knew I needed to get her away from my boy's door. She just kept jiggling the handle and muttering about the demon child. I should mention at this point that Tyler was and is the most joyful kid I've ever known. Jacob has always been more quiet and thoughtful, while Tyler is loud and smiles brighter than the sun. He'll do things just to make someone else happy. Jacob also thrives on making people happy, but he does it in smaller ways that you don't realize until you do. I was sure there was literally no possible reason for her irrational hatred of Tyler. I was sure it was just her mental illness speaking, but it was insane nonetheless. Luckily, my mom happened to be walking home from the bar right across the street from the apartments, and she heard the crash, which I now know was my front door being smashed open. My mom had lived in this town longer than I had, and had dealt with Leslie's outbursts several times, so while I was trying to decide how to distract her from my boy's room without getting stabbed, my mom was creeping up the stairs to my apartment. My mom stepped into the apartment, and Leslie turned to look at her. My mom asked her what she was doing, and she just burst out crying and kept telling my mom she had to kill him. They kept telling her that she had to. By this point, my husband had woken up and called for help. The cops came and escorted her away. They took her to her sister's house down the road. Very fortunately, her sister is under no illusions about her sister's condition. She knew that Leslie only got bad when she stopped taking meds and began drinking again, so Leslie was taken to the hospital to get her stabilized and back on her meds. The family apologized, and we moved before she was released from the hospital. The boys slept in my room until we did move, and for a while after that as well. Last I knew, Leslie is doing okay now. They think Tyler set her off because she resembled a baby the family had once lost. When she saw him, she decided her meds weren't working because she was hallucinating the baby still being alive, so she stopped taking them, then began drinking because she couldn't deal with seeing this baby everywhere. Maybe that's crap. Maybe it's true. I don't know. We haven't seen her since, and her family works hard to keep people from spreading stories. Tyler is 18 now and still full of sunshine. Jacob is 19. We have 2 more kids and have been married for 20 years, but this is still the scariest night of my life. I'm forever grateful for my mom diffusing the situation and that darn sticky door. I'm sure either Leslie or I would be dead if she had actually managed to get it open. Hi y'all. I recently found this subreddit and thought it would be the perfect place to share a frightening stalker experience I had when I was in college. This was particularly traumatizing for me, as I had just started to recover from 8 years of sexual abuse from the ages of 5 to 13 at the hands of my aunt's husband. This happened back in 2012. I had recently graduated from high school and was attending community college to save some money. In October, I was hired as a team member at a Chick-fil-A located about 3 minutes away from my house. In the same plaza, there were other businesses, including a Burlington coat factory my mom and I would occasionally shop at. I worked from 5:30 a.m. to 2 p.m., and in the weeks following, I started to get to know some of the morning regulars who we would serve more frequently. Most of them were very kind, just stopping by for their morning caffeine fix. One of the regulars we had, though, was a pair of gentlemen that would stop a couple of times a week in the morning together. One of them was older and very polite. The other was a short, balding man that always gave me the creeps whenever he came in. His name was Esteban. After a while, I started to notice that Esteban would come in more frequently by himself and only ever order a small black coffee. On one visit while I was at the register, he mentioned that he worked at the Burlington in the plaza. He also very casually threw in that I looked very familiar to him, and he must have seen me shopping there before. He offered up his personal discount if I ever wanted something special. Although I found his comment a little disconcerting, it wasn't all that out of the ordinary for someone to recognize a customer elsewhere, especially since both businesses were located in the plaza, or so I thought. I continued to serve him his coffee with a small smile and pushed it out of my mind, but decided to avoid shopping at Burlington from then on. As the months progressed, Esteban continued to come in almost every morning. Some of my coworkers started to tease me about my boyfriend, who would come in and ask for me specifically by name. Whenever I wasn't there, he would be rather upset and wouldn't order anything they said. After I heard those comments, I began to feel very uneasy. My mom doesn't drive, and one afternoon she asked me to take her to Burlington to shop for some gifts, as she was flying to visit family back home in Honduras. She usually managed to find a good bargain there. I felt my stomach twist in knots. I silently hoped and prayed on our quick drive that Esteban would be nowhere in sight. As we looked through the racks, my mom decided to go her own way, and eventually we separated. While I looked through the junior section, I suddenly had a gnawing feeling that someone was watching me. Each time I would look over my shoulder, though, there was no one there. I was feeling very silly, until I decided I needed to use the restroom. I walked down past the sheets and comforters to the small, dingy hallway leading to the restrooms, with no one else in sight. As I exited after doing my business and rounded the corner, I froze. Esteban was not so conspicuously organizing some comforter sets about 10 feet in front of me, with his back half turned. I had seen him, but I was sure he hadn't caught a glimpse of me yet. I quickly darted in the opposite direction to avoid any interaction with him and hurried back to my mom. She was ready to check out by then, and we left promptly. I had 2 days of class after that incident, and after leaving class early one day, I decided to stop by the mall on my way home to pick up a birthday gift from my dad. As I walked towards the JCPenney I was there to shop at, I happened to look up from my phone, only to realize Esteban was leaning up against the railing directly ahead of me, watching intently as I walked closer, stalking me with his eyes like prey. I averted my gaze and made a beeline for the Victoria's Secret, just a few feet past him. I thought that there was no way he would have followed me in there. I was very wrong. He pushed off from the railing and tailed me throughout the store. I stopped to look through some items and watched him from the corner of my eye. He was toying with a pair of lacy panties, watching to make sure I didn't leave his sight. That's when it dawned on me. This man had followed me. From campus to the mall. He knew I had left early and had tracked me the entire time. I picked something absent-mindedly, trying to push down the paralyzing fear I felt, and headed towards the register. He followed suit, but was cut off by another customer who managed to slide in line behind me before he could catch up. Since there were line dividers in place, he couldn't leave the line. I paid hastily and bolted out of the store, running as fast as I could away from Victoria's Secret. I hid for over an hour in the Sears on the opposite end of the mall. I was terrified of leaving and finding him outside another store. I finally picked up enough courage to tell an associate what had happened, and he offered to call security. The security guard escorted me back to my car, and I drove home staring into my rearview mirror for any signs he could be following me. I had to work the next morning, though, and without missing a beat, Esteban came in for his morning coffee. He was not happy this time, though. His face was contorted into a dark, angry scowl. Luckily, I was filling our ice buckets in the kitchen area behind the counter. I could see him through the small window in the door, craning his neck over the registers trying to find me, muttering under his breath. I felt hot tears welling up in my eyes and slid down the wall to the floor. My morning manager, my now husband, noticed my distress and came over to me, asking if I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't hold it any longer. Through childlike sobs, I unloaded on him everything that had happened with Esteban over the past few months. He looked very concerned and told me to wait in the office while he made a call. When he came back sometime later, the restaurant owner was with him. They had called the police and made it very clear to Esteban that he wasn't welcome in the restaurant any longer due to several complaints of harassment from multiple female employees. He tried to come in a few times after that, but was always met with my husband at the door telling him very forcefully to leave, or he would call the cops. With the help of the officer that responded as well, I filed a restraining order against him and have not seen him since then. We still live in the same area, but I absolutely refused to shop at the Burlington where he worked. I lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for a few years, back in the mid-90s. I had some crazy experiences there, but this one was the most frightening. I was in a supermarket buying groceries when this man started following me around. I ignored him as best as I could as he tried to talk to me, kept calling me Halloween Habibi, sweet baby, and kept asking me if I was Lebanese, but there was something menacing about how he was looking at me. Then he got on his phone and was talking very intently, all the while watching me and following me around. This was a big Walmart-sized store, so he was definitely making an effort, and this went on for about 20 minutes. I was very nervous at this point, and checked out with my items, and had started to leave. Just outside the door, and into the corridor of smaller stores, very common in Saudi supermarkets, there was a group of between 10 to 15 angry-seeming men, who all crowded around me, and started talking to me in Arabic. I played dumb and kept my eyes down, mumbling about my husband, hoping they would think I was not a lone woman and let me go. And people were walking right past and working hard not to look at this threatening group surrounding a lone woman. Just then, my amazing driver, a tiny guy of about 5'2", bowled through the group and grabbed my arm. He started to yell at me angrily, and then the men. "Wife, I've been waiting. You're so slow and stupid. And what are you all doing, you sinful creeps?" He threatened to call the Mutawa, religious police. The men fell back and looked ashamed and confused. Abdul dragged me out of there, talking loudly about how stupid and useless I was. I just went with him and kept my head down, as I tried not to drop my groceries from nerves. We got into the car. He turned around from the driver's seat to look at me and let out a big, deep breath. He looked terrified. He said he was so frightened for me. He had seen men gathering in the car park and knew something bad was about to go down. He said they had been talking about taking me. They thought I was Lebanese, and there was some very bad blood with Lebanon at the time. I'm ethnically Romani. I pass as white in Western countries, but pass as Middle Eastern in the East. Apparently, I have a very Lebanese nose. He told me there had been some kidnappings in the last month, with the victims found burned alive in tires right outside of the city. Abdul was a shit shooter, but he had gone whiter than me, as he told me all of this. He was shaking and genuinely afraid, so I don't think he was exaggerating. After that, whenever I was sent out on errands, he would always come with me and pretend to be my husband, a huge risk to us both. If the Mutawa caught us, they would have imprisoned us. He would have gotten it way worse than me, too. He was an amazing person to stick his neck out like that, for an asshole like me.